Hello, everybody, and welcome to another great Balticon session. And today we are talking about the evolution of online fandom communities. So how do we get together in cyberspace, and how has that changed over the years, and where might it go? But before we get started, I'd love to have people introduce themselves, and starting with Gail.
Hi, my name is Gail Gribble. I'm an urban fantasy alternate history author. I'm also a fairly prolific book reviewer and blogger, and I've been involved in online fandom since the era of mailing lists in the mid-90s.
Anne?
Hi, I'm Anne Gray. My first con that I went to was in '92, and I've been involved in fandom ever since. Or kind of before that, because I always read science fiction and stuff, but that was my first introduction to organized fandom. Since then, I've spent 25 years organizing fandom as a SMOF, running conventions. I started with MiniCon, and one of the first things I did for that was to fairly unofficially moderate their online discussion email list. And then I've been active through IRC and stuff on the internet ever since. I was very active on LiveJournal back in its heyday. And I also have been a TAF delegate and gone overseas in that sort of interaction with fandom, and been a fanzine editor and writer. I continue to write for Journey Planet and whatnot. So that's me.
Great. I do have to chuckle at the term organized fandom. It is
Cats, yeah.
but I know what you mean. I just did kind of like herding cats. Devin?
Hi, my name is Devin Randall. I am a Philadelphia-based playwright. I am actually here at the studios of Key West as a resident artist with them at the moment to work on a new play, but also work on my first book idea. So look out for that in a year or two. In addition, I've been a part of fandom since it seems like birth. I really didn't have a chance. I lived in a family full of geeks. I remember watching The Lord of the Rings with my mother and sister when I was about 5. So, you know, it's always been around me. And born in '95, dating myself, I know. But I've been a part of the internet for about the entirety of the internet, at least when mainstream audiences got on it. So I've seen the rise and falls and rise again of multiple online formats, and I'd love to talk to you all about it.
Awesome. And John?
Hi, I can answer perfectly well to JT. I live outside of Baltimore. Balticon is my home convention. Probably the first one I went to was in the mid to late 90s. My online involvement, though, goes back to being a recent college graduate and wanting to discuss a Robert Heinlein novel that had recently come out. It was The Uncut Stranger in a Strange Land. And I had a membership to the Prodigy Network. So going back to dial-up, and I found people that were willing to talk about it because there was no one in Binghamton, New York that wanted to talk about science fiction with me. And that led to a relationship with Heinlein fans that I continue to this day. And as you can see from my shirt, I'm somewhere along the line, we created this thing called the Highline Society. So besides just online fandom, I also run an organized thing that's dedicated to the legacy of Robert Heinlein. So I'm really interested to hear how things are going these days, because I have that, like, I know how I've done it, but I don't know how it's being done now other than like I'm on Facebook. So that's me.
Okay. And I'm Gail C. Martin and Morgan Bryce. As Gail, I write urban fantasy, epic fantasy, and near future post-apocalyptic fantasy. As Gail, I write urban fantasy, male paranormal romance. I've been in fandom since the late 1970s. My first online fandoms were Usenet groups back in the early 90s, and ran a fanzine in the early 80s. Right now, I'm the founder and co-con runner for Continual, which is the online ongoing multi-genre convention that never ends. I also run the Supernatural TFWNC fan group, and I am a staff writer as well for the Winchester Family Business, which is the largest fan-run Supernatural group on the internet. So still very active in online fandom in a variety of ways. And I'm looking forward to talking about how we've seen it change. So in those early days, and I don't want to exclude anybody on this if you weren't around in those days, online or just around. And so if there's something you've heard happened back then, and that's fine to pitch in with the two. I want everybody to be part of the conversation. But in those early days, you know, a lot of it was, we didn't have the kind of wonderful interfaces we have now. A lot of it was just typed, whether you were on Usenet or listservs, remember those, or some of the AOL stuff. And now we can see each other, interact a little better, for better or worse. What made those early communities special? And what were some of the things that maybe it was good to leave behind? John?
Just finding like-minded people was, I can remember, so Prodigy itself, so it was closed off. It was pre-internet. It was, you got who was a Prodigy member. In the anticipation, you heard that modem screech. And then it was, okay, I have to go in and I have to be able to download the newest posts. And then I'm reading the texts. And then it was like, so there were times that I would be logging in 10 times a day to see if anybody posted anything new. You know, and I didn't have notifications. I didn't have push on my phone that I could just know. I had to go and make the time to check. And that was kind of interesting. And then the very first time I met those people in person, it was like, can we trust them? That was a whole new paradigm to be able to say, you know, like, how is that going to work out? And it worked out great. But yeah, just, you know, no avatar, no picture, no URLs and links for further discussion. And what I think was great about it is people took the time to think about what they were going to say. And I think you don't have that now as much. I'd say it would depend on the community, but I'll stop with that and see if anybody has any thoughts to react to that.
Now, I would think that one of the upsides of that, no avatars, no pictures, is that you couldn't judge people by any physical trait or make assumptions about them. It was really just based on their words. So while it was inconvenient in many ways, and it counted on you being able to type, it did have that going for it in that anonymity piece, which we then lose as we go forward into being able to see people for better or worse. Devin?
Well, just thinking of the anonymity aspect of it, I think of how we've adjusted and how we've changed in negative about this. Like, for instance, for some reason now, people on the internet, we have no filters. We just want to say whatever we want. We think that the barrier of our screens creates a barrier of our lives and any actual real, any kind of real pushback to what we're saying. Though I think, interesting enough, Reddit is one place where it's kind of a gray zone in all this, where there is still some secrecy behind our identities and so on. Though if somebody actually cares enough to look through your profile, you can get some hints there, here and there. And so it really depends on the spaces. You can find those kind of nooks and crannies where that still matters. Certainly Discord can have that secrecy as well. It's really more about, one, nowadays you have to expect people to just be meaner for no reason. And then two, there are those spaces if you want to find them.
Okay. Anne?
I have to admit, I find it kind of funny that JT's talking about people would think more clearly before they would start. I mean, certainly when I got into IRC, you know, we would have huge flame wars and lots of things in all caps with lots of extra symbols. And you know, there was this time when that would just completely derail some communities, and people had to like create new channels and new places to be because they had to get away from people. We didn't have the term trolls back then, but we did have people who would disrupt our spaces. And in terms of making assumptions about people, I mean, part of the reason why I used the name NetMouse was because it was fun to realize. I had a bunch of nicks early on, but it was fun to realize that most people assumed that NetMouse was male. And as someone who was a physics major and is now an engineer and whatnot, like and an early Wikipedia editor, it was to my advantage fitting into certain parts of the community for people to assume that I'm male. And also as a bisexual person, it was fun to flirt with ladies that way online. But it was definitely a different kind of interaction. And even before like we had websites, we did have the opportunity to have profiles. We had something, Devin, I don't know if you've even heard of this, called a .plan. If you had an account somewhere a little bit, people could finger you. So personal. And so, you know,
just wrong.
I remember being in college and, you know, and we would finger each other just to see if each other's plans had changed, because that was like one of the places where we could put information about what we were doing, where we were going, what we were thinking about that day.
Okay. JL?
So I came into fandom in the mid-90s in the days of mailing lists and the forums, and specifically Highlander fandom revolving around fanfic. And in the mid-90s, I was 13 when I started, and my parents had just had a newborn, so they were not supervising what I did on the internet. And so most of the communities that I was part of were very explicitly 18 plus, but on the internet, nobody knows if you're a dog, and I didn't care, and nobody ever figured it out. And so I've been part of, you know, I was part of fanfic communities up through college when everything started splitting over to LiveJournal. And then I started focusing more on my professional writing career. So I thought I couldn't really do fanfic anymore. And that all kind of changed for me last year when the Old Guard came out and I got the fanfic bug again, and got more involved in Archive of Our Own and joined a Discord server that was devoted to the Old Guard. And it was like culture shock of how interactions had changed and how people related to each other. And I actually only lasted on that Discord server for about 2 months before I got canceled because I participated in a conversation of sorting movie characters into their Hogwarts houses, and somebody decided that because we were talking about Harry Potter, we were transphobic and they were uncomfortable having us there. So I got asked to leave, and I was like, well, okay, I'm just gonna go read my fanfic quietly now. And so it's definitely kind of been a roller coaster ride of being on the internet in the last 25 years as a fan.
Yeah, I joined one forum when I was very starry-eyed and a brand new minted published author, and only lasted one afternoon when I saw many of my literary heroes being utter buttholes, and said, I'm never coming back here again. I'd like to preserve a few illusions, and never signed into that forum again. So yeah, it can do a number on you, especially when people don't bring their best behavior. And JL, I love that you brought up fanfic, which is a huge online community. I got my start as a writer back in high school, writing fanfic, all the way through college and grad school. Now that I write books for a living, I don't have time to write anymore, but I do read a lot. And so I read a lot on Archive of Our Own, some of the stuff that's still out on LiveJournal, some of the stuff that's still out on fanfiction.net, although you need extremely good eyesight to read that stuff. It's really tiny. And I generally don't log in to read it, I just read. But there is a vibrant community there of people beta reading and commenting, and you were more part of that. I'm an observer. You were more part of that. Can you speak to that a little bit?
So I think that the community of writers and fanfic writers is still incredibly supportive and incredibly lovely. I do post fanfic that I have written. That handle is very separate from anything that I write under, everything else that I do on the internet, and that's intentional because I am, also a professional published writer. But but I've gotten amazing comments and everyone's so sweet. And it was just really funny that I could even tell when I joined that Discord last year, like the community of people who were there from clicking on the link through Archive of Our Own and the people who were there coming in through Tumblr. And it was just a very different type of community that was developed concurrently, and they were just kind of smashed into each other. But at the same time, like, I would not be the writer that I am today if I had not gotten the same amazing support from other fanfic writers when I was writing fanfic when I was 13 and 14. And I'm even still friends, like online friends, with somebody that I met through those mailing lists in the 90s. Her daughter now was older than I was when we first met. And like, I can point to her telling me, you know, you could go somewhere with this, to how the fact that I'm a writer now. So.
Oh, and that's a definite point to how the communities have changed, because I got the same validation and confirmation that I could entertain people with my writing from the people who read my fanfic. But back in the day, you had to take the physical copies to a convention, sit in somebody's room, and everybody made a big long line around the wall. And you would read a copy, pass it down, read a copy, pass it down. And these were handwritten, Xerox, mimeographed. And we would do that all night, just circle the copies. So yes, the internet has made that much easier. And then of course we had fanzines, but you still had to print them and collate them and mail them. So the online piece has made that much easier to share and be part of as a community. And anything, I don't know if you're into fanfic or have anything to add on that, but I want to make sure everybody gets a chance before we move on to the next topic.
I was actually going to add exactly what you just said, which is that fanzines, I think, also offered people an opportunity to have that kind of feedback, you know, especially with those that had letter columns and stuff. I think people, especially now that we have podcasts and stuff, people are not necessarily knowing what kinds of different formats people used to write in fanzines. Like a lot of them these days are articles specifically about history, fan history, or the science fiction and fantasy that we're consuming. But a lot of fanzines, besides having like con reports, also had just trip reports, stories of getting together with other fans, sometimes fiction stories, and so people did have to pass them around or mail them around to APAs, to publishing groups, and but it was another way people could get a similar kind of reinforcement that yes, people were enjoying this, and please do more.
It was almost back in the day, like you hear those stories of the explorers in some part of the world who run into somebody else that they know, and they're on the other side of the world, but hey, let's go have a scotch and talk. It was almost that feeling of, there are very few of us, let us find each other and commune. And it was a wonderful thing when you found somebody. It's great now to be able to find people more easily, but there was that thrill of, oh my gosh, I'm not alone. Devin?
For me, fanfiction.net was my home in my middle school and early high school days. Especially as a gay man and as a gay teen at the time, it was a place where I could feel nurtured to read stories, because while things have gotten much better, very much better, content in terms of gay representation still finds a real home in fan fiction and slash fiction. And so I really think fan fiction is a place where people can not only thrive as artists and like really start to experiment with their writing, but also where they can thrive as readers and as absorbers of content, and really find content that you can't really find in mainstream media, or at least not as to the fruition that you can find them when other people just like you are making the content.
Mm-hmm.
On the note of fanfiction.net, though, I have noticed, because I don't really go there that much, but every now and then I get the mood to be like, let's check in. And it seems like that is one site that unfortunately hasn't evolved in the past 10 or so years, that it just has been the same. And that's why it's weird, because it's still moving, but it's going at a very slow pace. And seems like fan fiction writers, readers, and fandom have gravitated to other spaces, which is generally interesting for the internet as a whole. As it gets bigger and as we get used to it, there's now so many different pockets that some spaces are being left behind.
Mm-hmm. Well, a lot of people gravitated to AO3 for a better interface, and LJ for other reasons, but yeah, I agree. JT?
Yeah, I don't really have much to say in the realm of fan fiction in particular. That hasn't been something that's ever been a true focus, largely because I just don't have the time to read as much as I want to. So I've never really gotten into the fanfic. But what I will say is the common thread, I think, too, is, the safe space and the ability um, to learn about people who aren't like you. And for something like me, I grew up pretty sheltered, middle class white community. In the 80s, people weren't out and things like that. To be able to just understand, and I look back at how I might have dealt with people then and how I've learned to deal with people now, and the science fiction community as being more accepting. And then particularly where I found people through the Highline fan community, there's a big argument about Highline, but if you truly get into the stuff, there's a lot of things that he said there that was tolerance. And so I've met a lot of people that I was able to say, yeah, you're not like me, but now I understand you better. And so that's what I got out of my particular interactions. And that barrier to entry now, you can find your place, or you can find your place to experiment and learn so much easier now than it was at that point, just because you have Google to index and search and find stuff. It's not like you're not fingering any, you're not fingering people. You're not using, what was it, Archie or Veronica, right, to be able to get into the for hand there. But yeah, so that's really not too much more on that. Whatever the next topic is, where does it go?
Well, and I wanted to come back to something that Anne said about, both Anne and Devin mentioned about the LGBTQ community. There was so much, which I'm very much part of. As I said, I write male paranormal romance, so I'm there a lot of the time. And there was such a vibrant community in different fandoms on LiveJournal and on Tumblr. And the powers that be kind of came in and said, we're going to Disneyfy this. And we're not going to, anything that looks slightly over PG-13, we are going to throw you off. And a lot of communities were badly damaged by that, and a lot of artists and a lot of other folks. And some of that has moved. Some of it moved to Discord, some of it moved to Nifty, some of it moved to a number of other sites, Blanket Fort and a dozen others. But especially in terms of finding community there, how has that changed over the years, aside from some of those big negatives like the big Tumblr debacle? Anne?
Well, definitely LiveJournal. I mean, what happened was that a Russian group or company or whatever bought LiveJournal, and before that it had been an open source project, and so you could know that you could trust the code, and if you wrote something that you wanted to be just private between you and one other person or a small group of writers or whatever, you could trust that. And then when it got purchased, the Russians were very homophobic and started to close down accounts, and everyone was just like, even if you weren't directly attacked, we were like, we don't want to be affiliated with that at all. And Dreamwidth branched off, and I'm on Dreamwidth, but the community never really moved there. And kind of like what Devin was saying, it hasn't really developed. When I go from Facebook or Insta or whatever to Dreamwidth, I'm like, oh yeah, I used to have my Flickr account and I would put pictures on from my Flickr account. And then as I guess it sort of felt like the internet got bigger, I didn't want all those pictures to be public on Flickr, right? Which was what was necessary in order to share them through Dreamwidth or LiveJournal. And especially as my daughter has grown, the panel met her earlier, she's 10, and like people started having experiences where people would take pictures of their children and then use them to advertise bad things, and we were like, oh yeah, that sucks. And we all started to maybe be even a little more conservative with how we shared media about our families and stuff like that. I had kind of the same upbringing as Devin. I found the Edgar Rice Burroughs under my mom's bed and consumed it and all that sort of stuff. And I grew up in Ann Arbor, Michigan. So I had the people at the Dawn Treader Bookshop who were all big science fiction fans and stuff. So I never really had or needed that moment of, oh my gosh, there are other people who think like me, because I had them there in person growing up. But but I think one of the things that that these communities gave us was an ability to continue to develop your thinking and build those connections, especially with people who were far away, you know, like, and that interaction between the online and the in-person, especially as relates to conventions. You know, you might make a contact at a convention and then maintain that contact through social media and build that. And then authors have used that, like Charlie Strauss on LiveJournal would call for beta readers. I know Alethea Contis has a group on Facebook that's we're, you know, we're readers, and then also we're like, you know, help make sure that things get reviewed and all of those other machinations that need to happen for things to actually show up for people on Amazon. And those, you know, people have created their own support communities, basically, but it's a little bit more, I don't know if secret is the right word, but it's, we're holding them a little closer now that we've had some of them explode.
Okay, Devin?
In terms of LGBT spaces online, I think really we've, like Anne was just saying, we've found our different like holes in the wall for online spaces. But what's really been going through my mind as Anne was speaking and as you presented the question was just how it's interesting how as we become more mainstream or as we become more accepted by mainstream culture, there's still moments of us needing to like hide or shift and move. And especially as commercialism comes into our online spaces. You mentioned very briefly the Tumblr situation, which really hit a lot of communities. The LGBT community felt it as well. And at the beginning of that was because of a commercialism issue with, I believe, Tumblr getting taken off the App Store, though unfortunately it was because of their censors not picking up on child pornography. And when the result of that was that a lot of communities left Tumblr to go to Twitter or to Facebook and so on. But then one thing that's been happening with Facebook in the past 3 or 4 years is that Facebook doesn't like our communities kind of using Facebook to promote our other spaces. For instance, I work for an LGBT men's news site. And we used to use Facebook to promote our articles and in our groups and so on. But Facebook has been making those posts be hidden a little bit more because they're like,
unless you pay.
Yeah, unless you pay more, you're like moving people outside of Facebook and so on. And so because of that, LGBT content has been on the withdrawal on these online spaces. And similar things have happened to other apps, dating apps, to like Scruff, for instance, issues of having their app taken off the App Store because they didn't fit mainstream standards and so on. So it's a lot of shuffling that's going on in the past few years.
That's definitely something that we see in the slash fandom community and in the male romance community. I have a reader group for my Morgan Bryce stuff, and I'm very active with other male romance authors. And it's a common problem that you can see very, very steamy male-female book covers on Facebook, but oh my God, show a guy with the shirt off and you're rolling the dice on whether or not Facebook is going to put you in jail for it. So there's definitely a double standard when it comes to any kind of content like that. It makes it difficult for fans to, whether they're fans of a show or fans of a genre or fans of a type of book, it makes it difficult for them to really have conversations that are fully themselves, because Facebook is always watching over your shoulder like your very prudish maiden aunt.
And if someone complains about you, they can shut your account down for periods, and
you have no way to come back at them. Yeah, Facebook has not been great for dialogue. JT, boy, we've got a lot of J's around here. comment, even if it's not necessarily on the LGBTQ angle, just any other aspect of fandom, or however you want to weigh in on that?
Well, what's gotten me through the pandemic is reading a lot of queer romance. And so I have joined a lot of the reader groups on Facebook and seen a lot of that pushback that can happen. And so that's been really interesting. And just, I guess that's just me agreeing. If JT wants to pop in and say anything.
Yeah. No, I don't mean, just maybe this changes the conversation a bit, which is probably good anyway. I mean, just in terms of what's the next thing to talk about. But, and I had posted this to the panel. I'm really curious, you know, if you all are, I think in one form or another, but if you're not just moderators, but if you're physically running your space or not. I mean, that's so, like the Highline Forum itself is a private group on Facebook. So it has all those constraints, like you say, people can get reported. And so I spend a lot of my time as an admin just saying, hey, play nice. But then there's the other thing of, if something is posted and it goes against content guidelines, then you're running against terms of service. But how many of you are taking the time to be able to, you know, run the thing from scratch on an internet server with the forum software of your choice? Or is this an opportunity for there to be the tech geeks that can make these safe spaces and make a living at it? Like, I think that may be one of the next stages for this stuff, to say, well, it's on the internet, you can find it if you know about it, but you need the tech geeks to keep it up and running, because I sure as heck don't want to spend hours per week having to keep a Linux server up and running and patched and things like that. So do you guys have any thoughts about that, how hard it's become? I had a forum and it actually crashed and we couldn't figure out how to make it run, and I'm trying to figure out how to keep it archived at least. And you know, so right now I'm on Facebook just because it's easiest for me. What do you guys think?
Yeah, we're definitely building out that back end on Continual. We started as a Facebook group, but we've been building out on with a website and Twitch and Discord and a number of other things, because we've got a great tech guy. But yes, we have an operating committee. We meet every week, and we actively program the site. We actively monitor the page. I do that with my reader groups as well, and my Supernatural group, because you have to. You can't be absent and just let it run. And I intentionally schedule and plan programming for them as well to keep the group active and engaged. But that's a big commitment. That does take a lot of time. And you can tell the groups that are sort of on autopilot, because the trolls don't get booted, the posts become repetitive, the loud people take over, and it just goes down in flames. And I don't mean for us to end up in a negative space here about fan spaces. Yes, there are problems. There are problems in real life. But fandom persists, and we've always had those problems. Where do you think, go ahead, somebody.
Can I just add, I think there are spaces, there's definitely an opportunity for people to do that type of thing. You know, obviously we've had lots of different forums even for tech communities that have come and gone. There was Slashdot had its heyday, and there have been places like my friend Sarah Zattel created Bookview Cafe as a place where people could have forums, and authors who were maybe, you know, mid-list or past their best-selling days could, or even up and coming, could have a place to share content and get feedback and find fans. And there are a variety of spaces like that. Some of them are Facebook groups, and I moderate a couple of Facebook groups, including JOFS, which is Journeymen of Fandom, because there's an old email list called SMOFs, Secret Masters of Fandom, that many younger con runners have found to be not that welcoming of new voices and ideas. And so a bunch of us were like, okay, let's, you know, create a new forum that's more inclusive. So Platypi being the, you know, mix of everything, we were like, we'll just make it JOFs. And some weeks it takes a lot of attention, and we have a whole committee of administrators trying to keep that as a welcoming space, and it's very hard. I wanted to mention, I do see I read a lot of web comics, and there is a big community of creators and fans of erotic web comics, yaoi and things like that. I really like to read. I started off reading Menage a Trois, which is finished and is now that she's doing Pixie Tricks comics. But there's, you know, in some of those areas, you know, obviously the app Webtoons has captured a lot of creatives and stuff like that. But there's an interesting intersection of stuff that's out in public and groups that are supporting each other, like the Hive creative group and stuff like that. But then also with Patreon, people are putting content that might be more risque, you know, hey, you can find this more R-rated version through Patreon if you support me. And that gives us the opportunity to support the artist as well as get access to different content. And that includes a forum where we can chat in kind of a more private space. So that's,
okay.
I just
Okay. Devin and JL, want to weigh in on that before we move on? Go ahead, Devin.
I would love to. I do moderate a few Facebook groups myself. And so, like everyone has said, it is a hard job. It is a lot of herding cats and a lot of approving and disapproving of posts. And one big takeaway that I've had from my experience there is that people don't read the group guidelines. They just don't.
They're feral cats.
No,
it's like at conventions, we create these huge program books with all the rules and then nobody reads it.
Never. And so one big takeaway I'd like the audience to take is please take the time to just read that. But one other thing that I had as a response is that, like, and this is a quote from whom I don't know, and the exact phrasing I don't know, so I apologize to whoever said it, but it takes surprisingly little to set up a job, or like it takes surprisingly little tasks to be enough for a job. And moderating is definitely one that has a lot of tasks that comes with it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in terms of the real question is, where would the money come from if we were ever to, you know, want to pay moderators? Right now, the reality is that it's either you are a social media kind of operator, and so that's just a portion of the job, or if it's something like a Facebook group. Some people may not know, but a lot of Facebook groups are actually supported by websites, bloggers, news sites, in order to secretly get their content out there and get clicks for that. So some moderators might be getting some pay from that. In addition, some groups maybe have occasional like GoFundMes or like, hey, any donations to our mods? In the future, I would like to see moderators get paid more. But right now, I truly don't know how that would happen. But as we were saying, either at the beginning of this panel or in our little like pre-setup before the panel, the future of online work is shifting because of the coronavirus pandemic, where companies are now becoming more aware of, you know, we don't necessarily have to do this in person. We can just do it through an email. And I'm sure that this aspect of the internet will shift because of it as well. I'm not exactly sure how though, but we'll see.
Okay, JL?
I have two things in response to what Devin said. I do love, and what Anne said, I do love the shift to Patreon in terms of making things that try to get throttled by the more commercialization of social media. But at the same time, we have to be cognizant of the stratification of who can then access that material if they don't have the money for it. You know, I would love to be able to just drop a ton of disposable income on all of my favorite artists, but then, you know, what if I'm, you know, a 13 or 14-year-old kid still living at home wanting to explore representation that they might not get elsewhere, and they don't live in the 90s like I did and got to just be on the wild west of the internet without adult supervision. And then again, because social media is changing so fast and so much of online fandom is kind of inextricably connected to social media, like I actually do run the social media for my day job, and I spend half my time trying to explain to higher ups why our links don't get clicked on, because we don't have a budget to promote posts. And the second you promote one post, they throttle everything else. And that's a rabbit hole I'm not willing to go down. And I helped run a blog for a couple of years called speculativechic.com. That was explicitly a fandom blog targeted toward feminist and LGBTQ representation. And we never figured out how to monetize it. And because we couldn't afford to pay our writers, we couldn't, justify paying for other things without paying them. And we eventually had to shut it all down because it just turned into too much of a time suck, as much as I loved being an editor for them.
Yeah,
Okay.
and there have been platforms that have been basically shut down by spam. We had Cheryl Morgan and I at one point created a Wikimedia-based information source that was meant to help people make more informed decisions when nominating for the Hugo Awards, because things would be published, but you couldn't necessarily see who had edited a book, for example. But we have a Hugo Award for Best Editor long form, and the spam bots just got too smart for us. Kind of like JT was saying, like we didn't have the chops to technically support it, and so we ended up just shutting it down because we didn't have enough people power to keep up with it. I think Wikimedia has gotten better since then, but we haven't tried again. But Fancyclopedia is on Wikimedia now.
Well,
I want to make sure we get a quick chance, since we are coming down to the end of the hour, to at least mentioned webcomics. Certainly podcasters have been out there for a long time as part of the community. And I want to make sure we still have time for everybody to go around and say where people can find them online. But in a few minutes, rather quickly, can we talk a little bit about the fandom communities with webcomics and art and podcasting? JT?
Oh, webcom. Not really. I actually I still buy through the creator syndicates to get my newspaper comics fix, and I find other things as people tell me about them, and then maybe I'll go back. I find the hard part is I need that master aggregator, because in my time that I have outside of the pay job, how do I go in and I read all these cool things if it's just on the site? And I need like the Uber RSS. I never really got into it, but that one thing, I'm stuck on Facebook because it's how I can communicate with all of my groups. So I don't get to branch out much more after that because I just don't have enough time in the day. So that's my initial thought.
Okay, Devin?
Well, for me, when I think of webcomics, because when I transitioned out of the fan fiction, I went more to, or it was around the same time, but I went more to BL, Boys Love, yaoi, that type of thing, which for those who don't know is gay romance, typically in Asian, created in the Asian continent. And there's a massive webcomic community there. In fact, it's blossoming in Korea, which they call it webtoons. And so that's kind of the background that I have. But in addition, there is a kind of like branching off in Western media. But the thing is, when you talk webcomics, there's two kind of set communities within that, where it's the legal kind of community and then the illegal reader communities. So you can find all kinds of like websites and Reddit pages and Facebook groups of people who find these things. And there's such a thing as aggregator sites where webcomics will be released on these pay-for sites, and then people will take that and put it on this other site where people will read. So typically, that's where you will find your two sets of communities who read those webcomics. In terms of podcasting, I love podcasts, but I mostly listen to comedians giving bad advice to people. Nicole Byer, who is a comedian on the Netflix show, Nailed It. She has a podcast of many podcasts, actually. She has one called Why Won't You Date Me, where she talks to other comedians about dating advice and mental health. She has one with her best friend. She also has one where she gets into fandom for the first time. Newcomers, I believe. So she's done like Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, and I think she's doing Marvel in the future. I think she's currently doing the Tyler Perry movies, because apparently that's a whole universe that's interconnected. And so podcasts, I mostly absorb on Spotify, but you can find them on other sources, which I can't claim because I mostly stick to Spotify. But podcasts are a great source where you can just absorb not just comedians talking, but like stories, real life stories, crime stories, and so on. And it's just a whole new world of new media.
Okay. Anne?
So as a SMOF, I've been studying race issues in the community for a while, so for about 10 years. And so what JT said reminded me, I do get a lot of email aggregators of all kinds of news, or particularly nerdish news that is related to BIPOC communities. I subscribe to Blavity.com's newsletter, which includes a lot of stuff about Fanish stuff, since we're kind of more mainstream these days. Blurred sends out a newsletter. I'm also part of the Black Science Fiction Society, which Jarvis Sheffield created, and it does have its own forum that he maintains, JT. So that's, an example of a not social media, independent forum that he moderates and has lots of options, and of course also has Facebook groups. There's Illuminate Science Fiction and Urban SF and Black Science Fiction, all on Facebook as well. I've mentioned already on the chat that I'm NetMouse just about everywhere. ZerNetMouse in some places. I own netmouse.com, so you can come find out more about me than you want, or you can find me under NetMouse on the Discord and in lots of forums.
Okay. JL, podcasts and webcomics, before we do that last round to let everybody know where to find us?
I was really into reading a lot of webcomics in the mid 2000s, late 2000s. And then like JT said, it became more difficult to go to each individual website and get, and keep track of, well, this one updates Monday, Wednesday, Fridays. This one only updates Wednesdays. And
that's how I figure out what day of the week it is in the morning. I go to Girl Genius and I'm like, this hasn't changed. Oh, it must be Tuesday.
Yeah. So I kind of fell out of that. And in terms of podcasts, I am not very much an auditory person. I joke that my spouse listens to a political podcast to fall asleep at night, which means that I'm the one who actually listens to the political podcast because he falls asleep and then I listen to it. And so that's about where I land on the podcast spectrum.
All right, 2-minute warning, folks. I know Anne gave us her connections already. JL, where can people find you online?
I am at jailgribble.com, which is where you can find all the info about my books and find my blog, where I post book reviews at least 3 times a week, and also do like a monthly roundup and I do still write con reports. So on Tuesday, you'll get my Balticon con report, even though it's been all virtual. And you can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Hana Edits, where usually you can just find me, promoting cool books and yelling about the old guard.
Okay, Devin?
Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Devin Randall. I am mostly a playwright, so if you're ever in Philadelphia, see if there's a play of mine going up. But in addition to that, if you want to find me online, you can find me at at DevJackRan. I'm on most of all the socials, though I'm not as social as I want to be, but I'm getting better at that. You know how it is, social media. And thank you for having me. It was a fun time.
Okay. JT?
Yeah, so I put a link in the chat there, HighlineForum.com. Basically, private Facebook group. That's where you'll find me the most. I also serve as the president of the Highline Society. That's a separate type thing. But what I'd encourage people to do, if you don't know much in terms of golden age of science fiction, if you want to have a good discussion about why Highline is still relevant, but also talk about current science, if you want to geek out on science exploration, the wonderful things that are happening in commercial space exploration, there's a lot of that discussion goes on, and it is heavily moderated to be polite. So if you insult somebody else, you are gone and you are banned. So a lot of people are very positive about that. It's only about 2,800 people. So, answer a couple of questions and you're in. would love to see more people there.
Okay, and I put my contact information in the chat. Please come on over to Continual. We truly are the online convention that never ends, and we hit all genres: science fiction, fantasy, LGBTQ, science fiction and fantasy, and romance and mystery, and everybody's welcome. So thank you all for being wonderful panelists. Thank you everybody who tuned in, and thank you to the program gods and the tech people for making this possible.
Go hang out on the Lord of Baltimore 2 Discord channel if anybody still wants to chat for a bit more. But thank you so much, Gail.
Yeah,
Thank you, all of you.
Have a good one.